country, Reverend C.O. Franklin. So the neighborhood that I grew up in the hood. And, it was like 2 blocks in the center of the hood that were for affluent people, just right in the middle. I mean, it was the strangest thing. I lived on a street called Belmont, and next to Belmont was a street called Boston Boulevard and a street called Arden Park right after that. And then the ghetto started again. So Aretha and her brothers, her father was, they were kind of well-to-do. And so they lived on Boston Boulevard. I go around the corner with Cecil, who was her brother, we were playing, and we go in his house, and I hear this voice coming from out of another room there. Piano's playing, voices singing. I could tell it was a young person singing by the voice, and piano's being played, so I thought somebody was in there either playing a recording by somebody with a young person singing, or there was another person in there playing the piano, because the piano was being played so well, and this young person was singing. And so we go in this room, and I'm standing, and I'm looking at it, and here's this little girl, and she's sitting there, she's playing the piano and singing, almost like she sings now. And it was just incredible to me, and I was just overwhelmed by seeing her. And it was Aretha. And so I met her at a very early age in life, and then 4 doors down the street from me, Diana Ross lived there. And we were kids together growing up on the same block, and I had a niece who, she and Diana were very, very, very close. And Diana used to come to our house. I mean, I was raised, my mom passed when I was 10, so I was raised by my oldest sister, who ended up having 10 kids of her own. So there was like 11 of us in the house. It was great because we didn't, we were poor, but we didn't know it because everybody in the neighborhood was poor. And so Diana used to come down and spend the night at our house, because it'd be nothing for 30 kids to be at our house at one time, because our house was like the gathering place. And we were of all ages, so there were kids there of all ages at all times. My sister was everybody's mama. And so I've known Diana Ross since I was probably about 9 or 8 or whatever. And then there was a guy who was in the first group I was in. We ended up being the Miracles, but at that time we were called the Chimes. And there were a lot of groups in our neighborhood. In fact, like Barry was saying, the guys wanted to get together and sing so we could attract the girls. And so there was a guy in our group, his name was Pete. And next door to Pete, the Four Tops lived there. And right across, there was the biggest street running down the center of Detroit is called Woodward Avenue. And right across Woodward Avenue, we used to have what we call group battles, and the Temptations lived over there. And they were called the Primes at the time, and there were a lot of groups and groupettes in Detroit at the time, because they were the Primes and the Supremes were the Primettes. And we turned out to be the Matadors, and then we had a sister group to our group called the Matadorettes. And it was a lot of that going on, but we used to battle each other in singing, and we always knew the Four Tops were then called the Four Aims, and we always did not want them to come, because we knew if they came, the best you were going to get was second place, because they were awesome even at that time. But all these people were like in the same neighborhood. And I want to point out something to you guys about something Bob mentioned earlier, that it is my belief that in every township, every city, every little village in the world, ratio-wise, there's the same amount of talent that was in Detroit. There's the same amount of talent that ratio-wise, this percentage of people in that particular place are talented people who can do what they do. And people have asked me many times, Smokey, why do you think all these talented people were there in Detroit, and Detroit happened to be like it was and all that stuff like that? And I have to tell them, now this man is my best friend. And fortunately for me, I met a man early in my life when I was a teenager that I could trust, and who was somebody who had a dream, who was about to make that dream come true. And I attached onto him just as he was about to make his dream come true. The reason that we had so many people in Detroit, or Detroit became what it became musically, is because we had Berry Gordy. See, we had a man who had a dream, who had the wherewithal to borrow $800 to start a record company, and get it going to the point whereas it became what it has become. I was telling Bob earlier today, it trips me out. I'm in the airport, and I'm in the airport, and I'm in the airport right today or yesterday. And I'm in the airport, and a guy comes up to me and says, my brother, Smokey, I love you, man. I love your music. I'm from Tanganyika. My God. Never in my wildest dreams as a kid growing up did I think my music would be all over the world where somebody from his country would even know me, would even know my music, would even be able to say that. But it's all over the world. On the very first day of Motown, when we started Motown, he started Motown. He came to us. There were 5 people there. He said, I'm going to start this record label. And we are not going to just make black music. We're going to make music for everybody. We're going to make music for the world. We're going to make music that everybody can enjoy and listen to with some great beats and some great stories. And our quality is always going to be high. That was what he said to us. And that's what we set out to do. And he and I talk all the time. And in his wildest dreams at that moment, we never dared to dream that Motown was going to become what it has become. It has become world renowned. It's become all over the globe. It's somewhere wherever I go in the world, people know the music. And it bridged so many gaps. When we first started out, there was no intermingling like you guys are now. And especially when we went to the South, we go and we do shows there, and they'd have a big stage in the middle of this big arena. And black people would be on one side, and white people would be on the other side, not even hardly looking at each other. Or black people would be upstairs and white people would be downstairs, or vice versa. And nobody was, they were just unto themselves. And a year or so later, we'd go back to those same places, and because the music was bridging those gaps, not only were they in the same area, they were dancing together. And you saw white guys with black girlfriends and black guys with white girlfriends. And it was just an amazing thing. And not only that, we were in a Cold War with Russia, whereas Russia was behind the Iron Curtain. Behind the Iron Curtain, and there was no communication. The only communication that we had with them basically was talking about who had the most weapons and who was the strongest and so on and so forth. And our acts were going to Russia. And they were coming back talking about how the people in Russia loved them. So it bridged not only racial gaps, but gaps between continents. And so I'm very, very proud of Motown and what it has become, and of this man for having that dream and starting it and making my dream be able to come true because of his dream.
John, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Obviously, you're not of this generation, but certainly you are a person that would be considered part of the Motown extended family simply because of the influence that Motown has had on your music. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really amazing listening to these stories because I think of my father and his brothers a lot. When I hear these stories that Mr. Robinson and Mr. Gordy are telling, because my father was born in 1949 in Springfield, Ohio, which is not too far south of Detroit, and it was a smaller version of what was happening in Detroit because it's a town that's built around a couple auto factories. The black folks from there moved from the South, migrated there, and worked in factories. My dad was a auto worker himself, and his family grew up in a tight-knit black community where a lot of talent shows were happening, a lot of dance contests were happening, and the music that inspired them the most and the artists that inspired them the most were people like Smokey, people like the Temptations. And so my first exposure to Motown music was through my father and his brothers. They would gather around every Christmas and they would sing, the Christmas carols that the Temptations recorded and that Stevie recorded. They would sing "My Girl" and they would sing They would sing "Just My Imagination." They would sing all these songs, and my first exposure to those songs wasn't hearing the record; it was hearing my father and my uncle sing it around the piano, and so it was an amazing thing for me to learn that music through them, and that was part of what made me want to sing. I was around that all the time, and I was also in church listening to what was going on in church, and I had a lot of gospel music around me, and all of these influences were what made me who I am. And I particularly, as a young person that sang and wrote songs and played the piano, was influenced by people like Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, because they kind of, after coming up through the Motown machine, they started to kind of go and do their own thing as kind of singer-songwriter artists, and that was kind of my model for how I would think about writing my own music. And I was heavily influenced by a lot of the work that Stevie did in the late 60s and the early 70s. And that Marvin did, of course, with What's Going On and some other records. And if you think about the breadth and the prolificness, I don't know if that's a word, but the just the amount of great music and great artists that have been so meaningful to several generations, I'm in awe just sitting here listening to the stories, because we are in the presence of greatness, we're in the presence of history. And you all should feel very privileged, because I feel very privileged to be here today.
Mr. Gordy, the amount of songs that Motown produced in the early to mid-'60s, it seemed to be one after another, almost as if it was an endless well that you were just drawing from in terms of songs and artists. And I had mentioned before this concept of the Motown sound. I said I thought how great it sounded on a car radio. But can you talk a little bit about how you created the sound? Because there certainly was a consistency to that sound.
Okay, well, the sound was done through love and competition, and we had all kind of rules. I had little philosophies that I'd learned from my father as a kid, and when I started the company, I was more important in the people that were singing the songs than actually how talented they were. The first artist that I met after writing my Jackie Wilson stuff was Smokey Robinson. He was an audition for Jackie Wilson's manager, and I happened to be there writing songs, and he came in with the 4 guys and a girl, and they sung a thing called Mama Done Told Me, which I thought was a pretty good song, but not quite good enough to be a big hit. But at any rate, they were turned down by Jackie's manager. They said, "You guys are great, I like you all, but you got a girl in the group and you're too much like the Platters, so we can't use you, but thank you for coming." And I was sitting there writing songs, and I thought they were really good. And I kind of got up and followed them out, and they were very dejected. And I said to them, to Smokey, who was the last one in line, they walked out, and he was the last one, and I said, "Jackie Wilson's manager didn't like you, but I did." And he looked at me like, "So what?" I mean, he said, "Yeah, well, you liked her, so what? Who are you?" And so I said, "My name is Berry Gordy." And you said?
I said, "You mean Berry Gordy, who writes all those songs for Jackie Wilson?" And you said,
"I know."
And then my lip dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe it, because I saw him sitting there, and he looked like he was probably about 18 or so sitting there, and I thought he was waiting to audition for Jackie Wilson's managers after we got done. And so he came out, and whenever I buy music, and Jackie Wilson as a kid growing up for me was my #1 singing idol. I mean, I would have walked 10 miles to see Jackie Wilson sing, because Jackie Wilson was the man when I was growing up. And so I had all of Jackie Wilson's records. And whenever I buy music, right today, I want to know who wrote the music, who created this music that these people are playing or singing. And I've always done that since I was a little boy. I used to, I grew up hearing I had 2 older sisters, and they played like jazz music. And first voices I heard were like Sarah Vaughan and Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra, Billy Eckstein. But the songs were being written by George Gershwin and Cole Porter and people like that. But I always wanted to know who wrote that music. And I was always like that. So I had all Jackie Wilson's records, and his name was on all the records. So when he told me he was Berry Gordy, I mean, I could not believe, how could this guy be Berry Gordy? And And he told me it's very Gordy and just took my breath away, of course. But he was him.
You know, you talk about songwriting. There was a great story when you told at the Grammy Museum about Tracks of My Tears, about how, and I thought maybe you should tell the kids how songs come to you, because the story of writing Tracks of My Tears and how that came to you is so not only inspirational, but it really sheds light on the songwriter's craft.
Well, I have to add something about him again. When he heard us, I've always tried to write songs all my life. And we had actually sung about 5 songs that I had written for this audition, because we thought that if we went there with our own material, then they would surely accept us, because these kids got their own material, you know. But none of my songs made sense all the way through. I could always rhyme stuff, you know what I mean? But I'll just give you an example. My first verse, I'm not going to rhyme it, but my first verse would be saying, "Oh, my darling, I love you so much. It is so good to have you here in my arms, and you just feel good to me." And the second verse will say, "I'll be glad when you come back, because I haven't seen you in 10 years, but I miss you so much." But it was all rhymed up, you know. And so one song, the one that he mentioned, he liked it. And that was what had him come out and talk to us about it, you know. But he taught me how to write my songs professionally. And one of the first things he said to me was, a song has got to be like a short book or a short movie or a short story where everything ties in together. You know, he said, you got 5 songs in one song. And so it's got to tie in together. It's got to have a beginning and a middle and an ending that tie in together. And even if you don't end it, you give people enough information so that their imaginations can end it for them. So that's how I grew up writing. So now I know as a songwriter, my approach to songwriting is, and incidentally, I was going to say, I have a song called "A Quiet Storm," and I love when I hear other people singing my music. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you played and sang "A Quiet Storm," and my God, man, please record that. Okay, so now, anyway, I have a philosophy as a songwriter. I know that there are no new words for the English language. If there are, I don't know them yet. They've just been made up. There are no new chords for the instruments that you play chords with, guitar, piano, whatever. There are no new notes for music. You've always got the same notes that have always been there since the beginning of music for America. So I really think that probably there are no new ideas. But for me as a songwriter, I know that I got to work within the framework of what's already there. So what my goal is to try to say, I love you differently than it's ever been said. If I can say I love you in a way that means I love you, but nobody said that like that before, then I can be ahead of the game as a songwriter. So he asked me about the Tracks of My Tears. There's a guy who was my guitar, and incidentally mentioning Diana Ross. Diana Ross, when she moved away from our neighborhood and moved to the Brewster Projects, she went and she formed this group. They were still in high school, and they had 4 girls, and they called themselves, like I said, the Primettes. And she called me one day and said, "Smoke, I got this group, and I want to sing for you." And blah, blah. So they came to sing for me, and they had a guitar player with them. Now, the Miracles and I were going out on the road, and we didn't have any instruments with us whatsoever. We'd get to a little town, and we supposed to have a rehearsal before the show, the concert that night. And the only person that would be at the rehearsal would be the drummer for the band who was going to play for us. And so now the drums, they don't play the chords and all the stuff like that. So, but the drummer's there, and he would tell us, "Oh man, we know your music. You know, the piano player that go downtown, he'd take his old lady downtown and get a coat and all kind of stuff, you know." And so we get to the show that night, they would not know our music at all. They would just be playing something, and we'd be trying to sing. So Diana had a guitar player with her, a guy named Marv Tarplin. So I asked her, I said, can I use Marv to go out on the road with us, so in case we get to some of these places where the musicians don't know our music, he can just play with us. So she said, yeah. And I'll see her right there, and she said, "Smoke, what about my guitar player, man?" Because he never went back. He stayed with me for all those years. He is one of the most prolific music people that I've ever come across in my life. He and I have written so many songs together. Going to a Go-Go, The Tracks of My Tears, and Ain't That Peculiar, and Cruising, and all just down through the years, because he is so prolific musically. And he would play music riffs and give them to me on a tape, Tracks of My Tears being one of those. And I would listen to him till I could come up with an idea for it. So I had this music for The Tracks of My Tears, and I couldn't think of anything to go with that music. And finally, one day, I came up with the first line. I take a good look at my face, see my smile looks out of place. If you look closer, it's easy to trace that I miss you so much. Nah, it's easy to trace that you're gone and I'm here, and that's terrible. No, it's easy to trace that you don't love me anymore. No. One day I was in my car, and the thought came to me, what if a person had cried so much till if you got up on their face and looked at them closely, you could see tracks that their tears had left in their face. So that's how that song was born. That's why it became The Tracks of My Tears, because nobody had ever described crying like that. So that's where that came from.
You know, it's interesting. Some years ago, many years ago, Bob Dylan was being interviewed by the media, and somebody in the media asked him, who do you think's the best poet of the 20th century? And Bob Dylan said, Smokey Robinson. One of the highest, I think, regards to someone who was a poet himself, Bob Dylan. Last question for Barry, and then we'll open it up for the kids. But, you know, we talked about civil rights before, and clearly this music was a form of inspiration for people in the movement. You got involved in the movement. You knew Dr. King. There was almost a kind of a responsibility put on the music's shoulders, I think, as you go into the 60s, because so many people look for when they needed comfort and we needed encouragement and a sense of belief, and they looked to Motown music. Can you comment on that?
Well, actually, you know, the civil rights movement was going very strong. I was a big fan of Dr. King. And obviously, he was a big fan of Motown because he came there and he, you know, we put out 3 of his albums, you know. So I didn't know that he even knew who we were, but we were talking, and I learned so much from Dr. King. I started a new label called Black Forum, because while I didn't agree with everybody that was in the movement, I did agree with Dr. King. But I was always concerned about that turn the other cheek business, because I was like a fighter, you know. And I said, well, you mean, and I was talking to him one day, because I had him on the contract, and it was really great, you know, because I asked him, I said, what is this? You mean if somebody slapped me on one side of my face, I've got to turn my other cheek? I mean, what's that, you know, about? And so then he went to explain to me about the people in the world, and that's where I got a lot of my philosophies from, about all of us together. Even though I knew a lot of stuff, but when he said it, he was saying the sameness in all of us is so much more powerful than the differences. And by turning the other cheek, you know, you give people a chance to think, and the good people an opportunity to come out and to join your movement. And I realized that, you know, and I agreed with him. Of course, I still don't turn my other cheek, but the point is this: I understand what his message was and why he was so successful, and that was it. So we had a Black Forum label, so not only Dr. King, but other activists could have a voice. You know, Elaine Brown and some of the Stokely Carmichael and some of the other people who had a view of what it was could do that. So that's, we were very much kind of in that thing. And then when our artists went around the country spreading joy and love and music, Smokey and the other groups, we had a thing called the Motown Review. And they got down south and they were doing so well. And I think in Mississippi or somewhere right around there, they were shot at, you know. And some of the kids had not ever been out of Detroit. So I was so concerned. I called Smokey and said, look, you got to get them back here now because, you know, and he said, no, we kind of want to stay out here because we bring us so much joy and we can see things happening. We know it's, you know, it's a little dangerous, but we're trying to spread love, you know, and we want to stay out. And I said, well, haven't you heard of Emmett Till, the Klan, you've heard of them, And he said, but we kind of want to do that. And so we only got 2 more dates, and so you have to trust me this time. And I said, okay. And of course, he kept them. They went out there and they continued, and people did fall in love with them, and which proves that there are more good people in the world than bad, but the bad talk louder and stronger and stuff like that. But so we had a lot of those kind of incidents, and they tell me great stories about when they came back and what happened and so forth. And so I'm just so proud of them, and I'm so proud to be here to talk about it. I'm so proud of the Motown legacy, and so the future generations can really kind of understand what that is, so I'm really happy with that.
Let's take some questions from the audience. I know some of you are representatives from different schools and communities. You had your hand up. Go ahead, stand up and let's hear your question.
My name is Perry James.
Hold on.
My name is Perry James. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And I have a question for Smokey Robinson. You said when you were younger, you all have like singing battles and stuff. Like, how would you come across a person that you would want to be in your group? And like, when you assembled the group, like, did you all have like auditions or like, and like, it's like
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, Perry. Mostly the groups in those days were people that you grew up with. They were your friends. I think that what has happened with a lot of the groups that you see that come and go so quickly nowadays, because they are people who are put together from different cities and different places, and they don't really know each other until somebody decides, okay, I'm going to put these guys, because I see this guy over here, he's very talented, and this guy over here, and this guy over there, and they're very talented. I'm going to put them together and make me a group or make me a band and, promote them and so on and so forth. But those groups rarely ever last. The groups in our neighborhoods were people that we grew up with, people that we knew. We went to school with them. We went to, we knew them every day. They were our friends. And just so happens some of them could sing. So we got together, 4 or 5 of us, and formed groups. And that's how they were formed. Yeah.
Someone else. Yes, ma'am. Microphone.
My name is Maribel Garcia. I am with the Southeast Rio Vista YMCA in Los Angeles, and my question is directed to Smokey. Looking back on your career before you became a Hall of Fame honoree, what were some of the struggles that you faced as a young kid trying to pursue a career in the music industry?
I think that the main struggle was to be heard. It was just to find somebody, like Barry was saying, to listen. And fortunately for me, and I say this because another reason that Barry started Motown was because he would produce records on us. And he had 3 or 4 other artists. And produce records on all of us, put them with other record companies, and nobody was paying us. It was back in the day when, they would pay you if they wanted to. If they didn't, they didn't. And that was it, So fortunately, I met him. See, everybody doesn't meet a Berry Gordy. But fortunately for me, I did. And I met a man that I could trust who started this record label so people could be paid. And whatever you earned, you would get it. And because he was in it before I was, and he was used to people not paying him for what he was doing. So I guess that pissed him off. So he wanted to start something where young people who spread their creativity and stuff like that, or who were creative, could come and hone their crafts. And if they had hit records and like that, they could be paid for them. So that was my main struggle, to find a place, a home, where I could be heard and benefit from it.
In the back there? Yes, ma'am. Hold on. Let the microphone get there.
You mentioned finding someone who helped you, Barry Gordon, but Gordy, sorry. But if we don't find someone like that who we can look up to in our lives, can you give kids one piece of advice that they can take and use to follow their dreams with?
Well, you know what? The world has changed so much since that time. And one of the greatest musical vehicles that has ever happened in the history of music is American Idol. Okay? I am a real advocate for American Idol. American Idol is a place where kids can go and you can go